Hey everybody, Anthony here, and this week we're thrilled to have Play to Z Games as a sponsor of this episode and to share with you their new game, Ascending Empires Zenith Edition. Ascending Empires is a 4X game that plays in just under 2 hours. You flick your ships across the galaxy, discover and explore new planets, build outposts, cities, research facilities, even starbases. All while your ships and troops compete to complete missions and claim alien relics that will establish your dominance over your opponents. With plenty of extra modules to switch up the experience, from new alien races with unique powers to immense, game-changing megastructures, and even good old-fashioned robot uprisings, Ascending Empire's new Zenith Edition is a unique galaxy-building experience. Use the code POD on their website, playtozgames.com, to receive 15% off your order. That's code POD on playtozgames.com.
At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
Welcome to Board Games Anonymous, the podcast where everyone is welcome to the table, but of course, no one knows whose turn it is. This is Chris.
And this is Anthony.
And I'm Jeff.
And this is episode 520, March Madness, Part 2, Civilization Games.
Woohoo.
We'd like to thank all of our Patreon backers for helping us unlock a brand new episode. Hey friends, we're back, and it is getting down to the last games of our March Madness Civilization bracket. And it's getting tight, it's getting fierce, and of course, we need the best of the best. We've brought our friend on, Geof, from the long view, to give us the best perspective possible on Civilization games. Hey Geof, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. That's quite the introduction. I don't know about the whole best of the best thing, but I do definitely appreciate you guys inviting me on. I had a lot of fun talking about Civ games last time, and looking forward to this March Madness here of trying to kind of take a look and see which Civilization game will rule them all.
Yeah. We got it. Boiling it down. So if you haven't listened to last week's episode, we started with 64 games in 4 different categories. We've knocked out half of those already. So just like rapid fire, knocked them out. But now we have 32 games left, representing 4 different types or areas or categories and themes of Civilization games. So we're going to go all the way to the champion this week. We're going to pick the top one.
Excellent. So if you haven't listened to that episode, please jump back. Anthony also added a video episode on YouTube, in addition to the audio one, which we usually post. So if you want to actually see the bracket itself, it's up there on YouTube right now, and you can check that out as well.
Yep. Yeah, and this will be up on video as well. So like if you're watching a video, you can see right now the bracket here as we left it last week. And if you're not, if you want to see what we're talking about, and we will try our best not to describe visuals. I'm always bad at that.
But you can imagine them in your head.
Yeah. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that game came up against that game. Like, no, we'll tell you what the games are, but it's still a podcast.
My.
But you can watch it as well.
Oh. Technology, folks. Technology.
Yeah.
It's what Civilization games is basically all about. More or less.
More or less. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's part of it.
Yeah, there's a track. There's a track to it.
A quarter, sometimes.
Yeah.
All right. So we're ready to dig in, guys?
Looks good. I'm getting ready. And Geof was very upset about what happened. and did not like the way the matches was going and bailed. I don't know.
Oh man, Jeff, just
Howdy.
he's back.
I have no idea what happened, but I am back. I have turned up like the proverbial bad penny. So hopefully that won't happen again. But if it does, I will come storming back. So yeah,
Well,
sorry about that, guys.
well, Jeff, you're historically anti-tech, which I was just praising for Civ games. But
There we go.
um, before we get into the bracket, because the bracket's a big thing, and I know that Jeff, you and we've all spoken about this last year about the value and the importance of Civ games. Maybe you want to just make yet again another pitch about why or how or the amazement of Civ games before we jump into the bracket.
Sure. Yeah. Hopefully, this will all continue to work. So Civ games have always had a powerful draw for me because of the sort of story that it's telling or the story that it's attempting to tell, right? So when you think about a general classic sort of a civilization game, going back to the original Civilization and Advanced Civ and stuff like that, you're really looking at telling our story, right? As people of European descent, right? That whole Western civilization thing. And so there's touch points that you're familiar with. There's developments that you're familiar with, pottery and currency and all these kind of things that you learned about when you were younger and how that led to the growth of civilization and stuff. So there was always something really interesting about that, and that notion of what if I was in charge, right? What if I was the person who was making the decisions, right? And then as gaming kind of grew and computer games and board games kind of evolved side by side in many respects when it comes to civilization style games, at least in my opinion, you end up with this kind of explosion of different types of civilization games focusing on different areas, different places, different ideas of culture, different ideas of leadership and who a leader would be or could be in these kind of fun what if kind of scenarios, right? And then you couple that with the varying focus of civilization games. So some of them are very much that sort of dudes on a map kind of game where it's more about territorial expansion and conquest and resources, population, that kind of stuff. And then you also have newer style, which is more about the idea of developing your technologies and technological trees and developing your culture and cultural influence and trying to tackle different sort of ideas all the way up into an expansive view of civilization games, which you guys have definitely taken. Taking a look at things like mycelial networks and whether that is kind of a form of civilization. Ants, right, and colonies of ants, and the cooperative nature of ants and how they work together, build together, have stratifications in their societies and things like that. So really civilization games have kind of opened up to a lot of different messages, a lot of different genres, and also, some different possibilities. I would say that a lot of them are still a little Eurocentric. I think computer games have maybe done a little bit better job with that. I think some of them, like my favorite, of Clash of Cultures, at least you have some different cultures represented from the subcontinent or Asia, places like that, which I think is refreshing and a move in a great direction. But I would like to see more from Africa, for example. I'd like to see more from Oceania. There's some fascinating civilizations that grew up in Oceania, and also in Africa, of course. Everybody talks about the Egyptians. It's always the Egyptians. The Egyptians. Where's Mansa Musa, right? Where's Mali? Where are some of the sub-Saharan kingdoms and civilizations that thrived and flourished? Love to see those represented as well. So, I think as the genre continues to grow, I think it's going to continue to give people the opportunity to tell stories and to kind of get to play that sort of ultimate armchair quarterback of, what would I do if I was in charge of all of this, right? And so I think that's what makes civilization games really kind of fascinating, whether you're looking at a very small scale or you're looking at a very large macro scale. So that's at least what draws me to them.
Excellent. No, well said. All right. Well, with that said, let's get into it. Anthony, what's our first matchup this week?
All right. So like I said, we're going into round two. We're starting in the historical sector, which is what most people think of when you say Civ game. So
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna dive right in on these ones. And again, we narrowed it down to 8 games last week from the 16. So listen back to that if you want to hear. If you're listening for a game, you're like, what about this one? Like, well, it's in there maybe from last week. But first up, we're gonna jump right into our first matchup. Number 1 seed, Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization, up against the number 8 seed, Europa Universalis, The Price of Power.
What do you say, Geof?
Well, I have not actually had the chance to play Europa Universalis, so I'm not going to be of much help there, but I have played Through the Ages quite a bit, from its
Mm-hmm.
first edition to the newer edition, with the added leaders and whatnot, with the fantastic implementation that was put out a while ago that really made it so that I could play it much more often than I was able to get it to the table. So to me, what I'm going to do, since I haven't played both of these, is kind of be the pitchman for Through the Ages, right? So why should Through the Ages win? I think Through the Ages should win because it was revolutionary at the time for being a civilization game without a map, right?
Mm.
And as soon as you say a civilization game without a map, the first thing that jumps to your mind is, oh, well, it's going to be all about resource production, conversion, and technology trees. Well, he managed to incorporate the nastier aspects of civilization, meaning war and aggression, through a card based system very, very nicely, actually, and really was able to capture the idea of um, the sort of balancing act that nations go through, trying to make sure that one is not more powerful than the other, the inevitable arms races that you see. And so, while most of the game really is functioning on a micro level, you are literally a micromanager of your civilization. Every rock, every idea, you are guiding it. You are, I don't know, like you're trying to be President Carter, right? Just trying to micromanage everything because he was such an intelligent dude, he thought he could do it all himself, right? And again, it's a really fascinating look at Through the Ages. It's just the story of development from the earliest times all the way up through jet fighters and space travel. So I think that Through the Ages is a worthy game to move on because it did a lot of things new and it didn't sacrifice anything of the traditional genre when you think about a civilization game, but it did it in a way that was very different because you really did get involved in the nuts and bolts of your civilization. So that would be my pitch for why Through
Sure.
the Ages should win.
Anthony, you have a different take on it?
You know what? So here's the thing. I also would pick Through the Ages, but let me just pitch on your Europa Universalis for a moment. This is it's among the modern trend of these games to try to like capture everything, right? Get all the little details, system upon system. It's a big sprawling simulation of a game almost. And part of that is it's trying to replicate and emulate the video game, which does this very well. Right? Europa Universalis 4 is just a beast of a game. And if that's what you want, it's like literally represent the development of Europe across this particular period of time. That's what you get. But it also just lets you kind of, in the board game at least, kind of fall into the sandbox and develop and build and work in with however you want it to work. So big props to Europa Universalis. I agree with everything Geof says on Through the Ages, though. So I have to go that way.
Yeah, I'm gonna go Through the Ages as well. I'm gonna give it. I'm gonna ping it though with one thing that it it gives you too much of a blank canvas. It's too neutral, and then you're building it up. It doesn't give you any unique aspects of a starting civilization to kind of build from that gives it any kind of feel or appreciation of the land in which it's grown out of, or the resources, whether they're natural resources or human resources out there. So when you're playing it, it does feel very sterile, and
Mhm.
then you add parts to it throughout. So Europa, at least that's something that it kind of grows from the ground up. You're building everything up. Um, but yeah, I'm gonna go through the ages as well.
Unanimous.
There you go, buddy.
All right. Next up, we have the matchup between the number 5 game, Nations, and number 13, which was a bit of an upset last week, Sid Meier's Civilization, the board game. So I'm going to lead in here because we did have like a brief sidebar before the show about Nations. And I'll let Geoff say his piece, of course. But I'll just kind of do my defense of the game first. Nations, the reason I like the game so much is possibly some of the reasons some people don't enjoy it as much, and that's because I tend to play it by myself. So it's a weird one. Civilization games are notoriously difficult to play solo. Through the Ages does it well. Most of the rest of these do not. So Nations works because it is yet another Civ game without a map, and you have a huge, sprawling collection of cards to choose from. I've played this game dozens of times. I don't think I've ever had like a similar combination come out, regardless of which civilization I'm playing with, whichever mat I'm playing with. And so it does give you like a unique feel and development, and you kind of, I don't want to say thematically because it is kind of a mishmash soup of like what you're getting out of the decks of cards, but you can kind of go in that direction however you want to, and it manages to get all the pieces into the game. Like there's war, there's famine, there's culture, there's military buildup, all that good stuff. In a system that is at the end of the day really just a card game, a stupidly long card game, which is again why I like it solo, because I could play it in like an hour and a half. But so there's that. So that's why I love Nations. I'll let you guys go ahead from there.
Yeah, Geoff, get him, Geoff, get him.
So, I mean, Nations does a few things that I think were both interesting and also annoying, right? So, if I remember Nations correctly, and it's been a while since I played it because I didn't love it, but it was popular enough for a while that I played it definitely quite a few times. So, you have a forced kind of choice mechanism whereby you can only have so many cards in your tableau, if I'm remembering correctly. And then if
Right.
you're acquiring something new, you're going to have to replace something else, right? You're going to have to get rid of something else. And I thought that led to a lot of really interesting choices, a lot of really interesting problems in the game that I had to try to solve. But I was amazingly annoyed by it because thematically I didn't understand, right? It's like, so why did I forget how to do this thing, right? I understand that this is more where, maybe thematically my civilization is pivoting in this direction, and so I'm focusing more on this. But I didn't really understand the whole, like, that's lost to the mists of time thing. Now, there are things that are lost to the mists of time. The Mayans were able to craft ceremonial blades made of flint that no one has any idea how they could have done it, because anyone who's tried to recreate them can't do it, right? So there are ideas that have been lost, that have maybe been forgotten. But in Nations, it was so tight. I didn't really feel like I was developing a sprawling civilization as I continued to grow. I was always funneled in this like narrow channel, which kind of bugged me. I thought the war was a little abstracted. You basically had a track that kind of went around, and it's like, do I have the strength? Do I not have the strength? It was kind of wasn't as exciting as Through the Ages, because Through the Ages involved that card play between the players where, out of the blue, someone could play an aggression card against you, and things could happen. You also had the opportunities and the risks in Through the Ages of, if you did want to expand into colonies and new areas, you were actually losing some of your military, right? Because you're now more spread out. Nations was more about like just kind of building this up so that you kind of have that. And I didn't love that. It was a little too abstracted to me. And then the final thing for me that was difficult was the idea that, I'm playing the Persians and I've made Stonehenge. Like I didn't really get that. It really kind of was very jarring to me thematically. And, my friend who taught it to me, uh, um, was just like, hey, no, don't think of it like that. Think of it as like the Persians took over the British Isles and Stonehenge was there. And I'm like, okay, Persians taking over the British Isles. That's still a little bit of that's a long way for the Persians to go.
Right.
So, it didn't work for me the same way that other Civ games worked for me. And so to me, it felt more mechanical. So it's kind of interesting that, Chris, you described Through the Ages as kind of generic and, sort of didn't really feel like the culture, the culture you were building was very differentiated from anybody else's other than maybe the ruler. I have a lab, you have a lab, you have a library, I have a library. It's like I get that, and that's a definitely a worthwhile criticism, which is why maybe some games, Clash of Cultures, do it maybe a little bit better. But at the end of the day, I really think that Nations just wasn't for me. So, what are your thoughts about it, Chris?
Well, Jeff, I think you'd like Nations better if you realize all of those amazing modern or historical or ancient works of supposedly humankind were actually just aliens. They were just aliens, Jeff. Aliens did all those things. The pyramids, Stonehenge, it was aliens.
So Stonehenge was in Europe, and then it was in Africa, in Egypt, in the ancient Egyptian civilization, and then the aliens moved it.
Initially, it was on Cordup 3, and then it was shipped over to Earth.
So it wasn't even built by.
It was prefab. They built it over there and then shipped it over here.
They shipped it over. All right.
I don't know.
Manufactured wonders. Yeah.
Yes. For me here again, Nations does historically kind of sit in the shadow of Through the Ages. It's somewhat in that same kind of. We're trying to do another version, hopefully different and better than Through the Ages, but somewhat still similar. The thing about Sid Meier's Civilization here, I believe this is the one from 2010, is the map really kind of gives me more of that feel that I'm building out. And my starting nation ruler class with the actual leader on the board, and that particular culture has some starting benefits and detractions, and then you can build from that as far as different political ideologies and civilization types and war and stuff like that. So my vote's for Sid Meier's Civilization as well.
All right. I had a feeling, and I'm okay with that. Nations made it through one round. I like Civ the board game too. We'll talk about that next round.
Yeah.
All right, next up, the funny matchup that we did to annoy people.
To be fair, we annoyed 18 people.
Yeah. All right, so we have number 3, Mega Civilization, versus the classic Civilization from 1980, I believe. So at number 6. So this is Francis Tresham's original, like the first one. So do we want the original that had the most impact, or the really big, super long version of that?
I have the original on my shelf. I'm looking at it right now.
Awesome.
It's tough. Like most people, like Mega Civilization is almost a placeholder for Advanced Civilization with the Eastern and Western, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of what it boils down to. And Advanced Civilization, I think, in my opinion, is definitely better as a game than Civilization, but Civilization has a little bit lower of a bar for entry and to learn and to play. So it's hard because I've never played Mega Civ. I've never even played full Advanced Civ. I've only ever played, I think, Western. So if Mega Civ is a stand-in for Advanced Civ, then I have to probably go with Mega Civ, just because I think the trading and the archaeological succession table, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, is a little bit more robust than it was in the original Civilization game, but the ease of play maybe might weigh in. I'm kind of torn on this one. Where do you guys sit?
Yeah, so it is a tough one because I feel like you do have, you have the original. It does a lot of really interesting things that were revolutionary at the time.
Mhm.
And it is a little more straightforward. It's certainly shorter, relatively speaking.
Only
And
5
even, huh?
Only 5 or 6 hours.
Exactly. Yeah, you could actually play it in a day.
That's easy
Um,
peasy.
I mean, even if you split Mega Civ in half and you just play Eastern or Western, and I own Western, I haven't played both together. It's a bit too much for me, but even if you do that, you're looking at like a 7-8 hour game, right? So it's very long. But that doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot if we're talking about like which one does it better. I do lean towards Mega and like all the games that it encompasses, because it just feels like you're doing more of the things that are involved in building and managing your civilizations. If I'm going to play this type of game, where I'm like, I want to do all the little things and I want to think about all the little things and I want it to take a long time and I want to have a lot of people at the table, then Mega Civ stands out for me.
Yeah, I think for a functionality point of view, if we're asking either which game would you play or which game would get to the table, or in even some cases, which game would you rather have, I think Civilization, the original, fits that by far better. Just because playable, accessible, historical, and still retains the essential elements that make a great Civilization game. Mega Civilization, you can laugh it off as a joke because on some level 18 players playing that kind of game, that level, that quality, that complexity, 3.7 on Board Game Geek, is insanity. It's only something, and I've seen it only once in all the conventions I've ever gone to, small and big, where it was like the first day is like teaching and you have to watch the video in advance of the teaching, and the teaching's a day and then the game plays a day or 2 days for a full game of it. That being said, if there's going to be any game that is well deserving of that kind of mega, play style, almost like an epic mega game, yeah, it's got to be a Civilization game. I really can't imagine any other game type genre that you would want or ever need 18 players to play. So I'm going to go with Mega Civilization just because it, civilizations do deserve 18 players at the table. It just makes sense thematically, right? All the different civilizations happening is not just one civilization happening in a vacuum, right? So that's my vote, Mega Civilization.
I think it's interesting that you bring that up, because it definitely has that feel of epicness, right? So if you're going to play a game that's going to take you a day or two of
Yeah,
game time, then you're probably going to lean towards something like a Twilight Imperium or
sure.
a Advanced Civilization or something of that nature, right? But I do kind of think it's interesting, like when I think about the idea of having that many players at the table playing. Yeah, there were definitely, just like I was talking about in the intro, so many different civilizations, but were they all in contact with each other? Were they all thriving at the same time? Were they all
Mm-hmm.
butting heads against each other at once? I just don't know that that's something that I
Well,
don't
that's
know.
the
Like
that's
there's
the kind of thing,
yeah.
Jeff, that a game does very well, though, because like I think you make a very good point, because the belief, like if you play it through the ages, everyone starts at the same, point, and then
Mhm.
everyone escalates relatively at the same pace as long as they didn't screw something up earlier. Mega Civilization, you could be on the far side of the board and just have some inefficiencies for many reasons, or have some military from other countries attack you and keep you down,
Mhm.
and then you would progress at a lesser state. Only in a game that would take 18 hours would that the fine nature of different cultures at different positions in their evolutionary civilization kind of progress would actually come into play. In a 1 hour, if you play Seven Wonders, everyone plays a card. Everyone plays a card. Everyone plays a card.
Right.
18-hour game, 18 players at the table. Somebody is still in the Stone Age. probably somebody benefited from, natural resources or a weaker enemy. I got to believe that happens quite often.
Right. So you're saying your argument is you would actually see rises and falls of different civilizations.
I believe so.
Yeah.
I think over it gives you the number of hours that you need for that to the rise and fall of certain things.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because like I said, I've never played it with that many people. I think the times that I've played Advanced Civ have been like 5, 8. I think it was 8, maybe 7. I don't know. One was like pretty full, like all the players, and then the other was like a 5-player game. Actually went to Harrisburg with a friend of mine to meet up with another group of guys, and we played Civ, Advanced Civ for the day. So yeah, that would be interesting to see. I would love to just see that game played at that full player count. I'm with you on that one.
Sounds good. All right, Anthony, what's up next?
All right, last matchup here in the historical bracket. For now, we'll come back. We have Imperium Horizons, which was our number 7, up against Clash of Cultures, the number 2 in this bracket. So we got another card game, no map, and then a much more classical, larger, sprawling, kind of definitive version of the classic Clash of Cultures Civ game.
With elephants.
With elephants.
Yep.
They're on the cover, too.
That's because you couldn't get the expansion because it was out of print forever.
So expensive.
And the secondary market was insane. So all of us holding copies of Clash of Cultures, the base game without the expansion. Yeah, that was a constant drama throughout.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with Clash of Cultures. I obviously elephants are a thing, but the map, the tech that actually comes into play, the miniatures, really do play a very big part in kind of evoking a culture that's growing. To see more and more pieces on the board, see the board being built out. Imperial Horizons is great. Love the fact that they have all the different cultures in play. The artwork is fantastic. Culturally, it's much better because of the diversity that comes into play here. But I think Clash of Cultures thematically just hits in the right place for me.
Yeah. Imperium is interesting because, like you said, like across the 3 Imperium games, there are something like 35 different cultures.
It's amazing. They've done such a good job with this.
Right. Yeah, and it's you do a lot of very thematic things within those cultures, and the difficulty reflects the different things that you can do. Yeah. It is a bit abstracted because of that, though. Like it's like this deck is thematically linked to this particular culture at this particular time.
Yeah.
And then it is very like there are versions you can play with up to 4 people, but don't do that.
No,
it's not good like that. It's a 1 or 2 player game, really. So you don't have the opportunity to have that like sprawling element of like this what you want in a Civ game, which is civilizations interacting with each other. And Clash of Cultures, man, like I would have been a little hard pressed to it's still great, but like just the base game of this, which is what I had for years.
Same.
It was good.
Yeah.
But just having all the stuff that I couldn't get.
Yeah.
Right. It's the Monumental Edition. It's so good. So that's my choice as well. I know, Geoff, this is a favorite of yours, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is my favorite. It's probably still my favorite game. I love everything about it. The tech tree, the exploration, the fact that you have cultural influence as well as influence by force, the fact that you have sort of naval aspects to it and navigational advances and all of that to me is just fantastic. The fact that you have the different cultures that are represented and you have that differentiation that Chris was talking about with the different cultures with their different advantages, disadvantages, and whatnot. To me, it's still the perfect civilization game. There are drawbacks. The bookkeeping is enormous, right? I'm trying to keep track of all of the bonuses and things that you can do and get to do because of the text you've developed can be overwhelming for new players. It can definitely take a lot of time, depending on how many people you're playing with. But it's still, to me, far and away my favorite Civ game. That being said, if you would put Imperium Horizons up against one of these others, it would have been a much harder choice for me.
Same.
Yeah.
Imperium, I got it, and I took it to a con that we started doing. It's just a small group of us. We just do a house con. When WBC moved out to the middle of nowhere, we were like, okay, well, I guess we're going to do our own thing now. And Imperium Classics, most of us wanted to burn it on the first playthrough. Struggle,
Yeah.
torturous, just could not figure out how that game was supposed to be played. The rule book was not
Ooh,
very good, in my opinion.
terrible.
It
Terrible
was,
rulebook.
and then along comes Imperium Horizons and some better video tutorials and things like that that have popped up. And then actually took a chance on it, got it, love it. I agree. It is a 2-player game, a head-to-head. I agree that most of the fascination in that game, boy, comes from trying to figure out how that deck works, how your Civ works, right? Because each one is fairly radically different. And you can get better at playing a Civ over time. You know, I started with the Japanese and I played the Japanese over and over and over. And I got pretty darn good at playing the Japanese, right? And I pivoted to the Mayans now, and with the sort of mask economy that they have,
Mm.
crazy stuff, right? Really, really interesting, really enjoyable to play. There's just so many things about the game that I love, but I think the barrier to entry is high.
Yeah.
I think just like Through the Ages, because it's card play and abstracted to a large degree, it's hard for new players to kind of visualize and like latch on to like, what am I doing? What does this mean? What is this standing in for, right? Whereas when you have the map, the minis, the tech tree sitting right in front of you, and you're like, I need to develop sanitation because last round this happened, and like it's much more easy to kind of grasp what you're trying to do and how it all works, as opposed to Imperium Horizons or Captain's Chair or whatever it is you're going to call it, right? So it's an awesome
Yeah.
system. I really am so happy that they put out Horizons, because now I went back and reacquired classics, and now it makes sense to me, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I might go back and grab the other one too, the Ancients, I think it is.
Legends.
Legends, thank you. And just such a cool game. Really enjoy it, but I got to go with Clash of Cultures.
Yeah, it's a tough matchup. But yeah, I'm 100% with you on that one. All right. So there are our 4 moving on from the historical section. Now we're on to the micro civ section, which is like our mishmash of kind of goofy stuff. But like the goal here, the idea here is singular groups of individuals or animals or creatures developing a civilization in their own unique way. So these are not mechanical necessarily civ games, but thematically in the way we're looking at them. So we have some interesting matchups as a result. So first up, we have the number 1 in this group, Zulkin the Mayan Calendar, up against the number 9 in the group, the Wolves. So I don't think you could have any more random of a matchup than that. I don't know if we do have any more random of a matchup than that. And we talked about Zulkin a little bit last week. It's a fantastic game about just kind of developing and working within the Mayan civilization, and you're putting your workers out there and they're moving around these wheels, and you're trying to basically investing the time with those workers into generating the different resources, to feeding people, to moving up these different tracks, and ultimately, because it's a Euro, score points. Whereas in Wolves, you are wolves. You are trying to be the best wolves and the best wolf pack, and grow and get rid of the people around you and kind of develop and have kind of leadership in that space. So, what do you think, guys?
Chris, you want to take point on this one?
Sure. It's a challenging one because again, we're looking at 2 different civilizations from their point of view and in a very limited scope. Zulkin has always been a favorite game as far as building up a civilization with the technology, trying to utilize resources, trying to feed your people. And really, in particular, why it kind of lands for me as far as a Civ game is, at least thematically so, is we're actually dealing with the Mayan calendar. We're dealing with time and how we kind of, in most worker placement games, when you place workers out, they do their thing and they immediately teleport back to you. And like time is not an element here. In Zulkan, it's actually an element. It actually plays a very large role into how your culture kind of develops and grows. Wolves is pretty excellent game as far as, again, you have your alpha, you have your leader of that particular civilization of wolves, and they're trying to expand and grow their territory. So it does have that kind of 4X model to the civilization building, but again, from a wild animal type of perspective. Both very good games, both pretty thematic as far as Civ's going. I think I'm actually going to pull for the wolves here, just because you have other civilizations of wolves kind of growing and dominating that you have to deal with for resources and areas. Whereas Zulkin, even though I believe it's a better game, you're not really interacting with the other groups of people that are happening, the other players at the table. Like everyone has, you can block a spot or two, but there really isn't a jockeying for like particular areas and cultures. So I'm going with the wolves.
Yeah, I'm on the Zulkin side myself. I like that idea of like building the Civ. So whether or not you have the interaction there is, but yeah, this is definitely the differentiator here.
This is a really hard one, which is very weird for me to say because I would never have called the Wolves a Civ game in any way, shape, or form, personally. But you made an argument, right? And the argument was, territory, leadership, expansion, feeding. It is all there, right?
Yes.
So here's the thing: like as a
And
subject,
it has a map too, Geoff.
I know it does. As a subject, I
Yes.
love Zulkin, right?
Yes.
Fifth grade teacher in Pennsylvania, so the Mayans are in my curriculum, right? Always, right? Deep dive on the Mayans as a teacher, but then also as I learned more and got more fascinated with the culture of the Mayans, the Olmec, the Aztecs, etc. Right? So I adore Zulkin as a game. I still have it on my shelf. I love the wheel mechanism. I love the delayed gratification of the worker placement. I think that's brilliant. I think playing with time, as you said, is a really interesting idea. I trace that, at least for me, all the way back to Thebes. Was the first game where time is a resource and an element, and you can learn all this cool stuff, but it's going to take you a lot of time. You can travel over to here, but it's going to take you a lot of time, and then you got to wait. Other people have more opportunities while you're waiting. So I think Zulkin does a really good job of that. The artwork is phenomenal. The production is fantastic. But theme, man, this is where I'm getting hung up, right? Because Zulkin, yeah, the corn is a resource. Awesome. Yes, you're racing up tracks, but what do those tracks really mean? If you're not really, I mean, I think the expansion definitely helped in this area, but in general, it's very much a resource management game. It's a very clever resource management game, but you probably could have set it anywhere else where, this widget takes this long to make and that widget
Sure.
only takes this long to make. And it could have been a game like Factory Funner, which I think actually was a game. So here's the problem, right? Because I love Zulkin. I really do. But the Wolves, yeah, it's more thematic, right? Everything about the Wolves is actually more thematic. The alpha behaves like the alpha, right? The pack
Yes.
behaves like the pack. The different regions where you're kind of like almost adapted or better suited to go into as opposed to the others. And then the card play, I think there was card play or tile play where you had to kind of set yourself up so that you could have the ability to move into that area. You had your dens, which are almost like your cities, trying to set up your dens. You have a game that you're after, which is a stand-in for any other kind of resource, whether it's oil or coal or whatever it happens to be. Hey, well, guys, I think I'm gonna have to. Right before this recording, I was Zulkin all the way, but I think I'm gonna have to go with the Wolves. Um, I
Made a
think,
good pitch, Chris. Made a
yeah,
good pitch.
Woo!
All right.
that was a
Wolves
weird one.
moving on.
I don't even know why I did that, but it just, yeah, I do know why I did it, but it doesn't
Yeah.
feel good, Chris.
It fits all the markers, right?
It does.
It's there. All right, moving on to the next one here. And we have number 5, March of the Ants, versus number 4, Dominant Species. So
Brutal.
all animals here. It's all animals. So we don't have to worry about human civilizations this time around. March of the Ants is legitimately it's a game about the development of an ant civilization and the management of that. The Evolved Edition, the more recent one that's coming out now, really amplifies that a lot, both in terms of presentation and artwork, but also in terms of gameplay and just streamlining the game, because it is relatively old, the original version of the game. Dominant Species is an all-timer, right? You play as one of these different types of species, and they're all very unique in how they approach the board. It's a pure area control 4X type of game, but at the same time, you're building out this life form in a way where they have to live within the environment that is developing around them. So yeah, it is a tough one. I don't know.
Yeah, this is another one where you're breaking my heart here. His Dominant Species is another one of my all-time favorite games. It's probably in my top 10, top 20.
Mm-hmm.
It was a revelation when I played it, right? I'd never seen anything like it. It simulated the pressures of the environment upon a species and how evolutionary factors, pressures, can lead to mutations, which then lead to new opportunities for expansion and growth, competition. I 100% agree that this is a phenomenal game, but I'm going to be a little heretical here. There is nothing about this game that says to me it's a civilization game. To me, this is a dudes on a map game, really. And Chad Jensen is known as a war game designer, right? Made some of the greatest war games that have ever been published. And so, because, like, yes, your species is adapting and evolving, right? Yes, your species is spreading, hopefully, right? But your species is surviving what happens to it. Your species is not exerting its control over its environment, right? So if suddenly the world becomes wet and all of the food sources that I have are now more tuned into a water environment, things like fish and insects and amphibians and things of that nature. Well, if I can't adapt to that pressure, I'm not going to make it, right? Because evolution tells us that your responses are either adapt, move, or die. That's it, right? And the game does a phenomenal job of that. I think that this game, from an educational standpoint, does a better job of explaining these processes than any other game I've played. It's absolutely phenomenal, right? And wanderlust and that idea of, you're going to explore. You're always going to try to push the boundaries of your territory, but you might end up going into a territory that's so inhospitable to you that you die off there, right? So I think it's a phenomenal game in that way. But March of the Ants, because of the very hive nature, the cooperative nature of ants as a species, right? And obviously there's more than one species, but you get what I'm saying. They do seem to have a little bit of a society, right? They have a hierarchy. They have clearly defined roles among their members, right? And I have not played the expanded edition. I played the original edition, and I thought that it captured that, right? So you have differentiation of different types of ants and what their roles are with your queens and your workers, your foragers. I think there were foragers. And, you have all of this going on while the hive is growing and expanding, right? So again, Here is a living organism that is manipulating its environment and shaping its environment using the resources that it has, which is to me more of a hallmark of a civilization game. So if you ask me which game I would rather play, it's just like the last round. If you ask me which I would rather play, I'd rather play Zolkin than the Wolves, right? But if you ask me in this round, I'd much rather play Dominant Species. Love it. One of my favorite games. Brutal, nasty, mean. Absolutely adore it. But I think March of the Ants is much more of a civilization game.
What about you, Chris?
Philosophically, I would say that at an animal based level, especially in that time period, that evolution plays the role of supporting or growing the civilization. So for dominant species, for a particular species to grow and adapt to the changing elemental kind of system that's happening, that you are choosing cards, you are choosing actions. So can we say it's, overt, intelligent choices to keep their particular species going, from the movement to the, attacking other species to adapting to the different resources, and even in the game itself, where when you have an opportunity to put other resources out there for you to eat or choose what additional foods you're going to eat, that's evolution kind of supporting or providing for a civilization, right? As human beings, and as you argue, Geof, like ants have taken the evolutionary system that provided for that animal type of civilization and went a step further with having more of what we think of a human civilization, with rooms and dens and technologies and specialities amongst the different ants. And if you know anything, if you dive deep into ants, like ants do farming. They actually have like aphids and other, bugs and creatures that they utilize in different ways. So there is certainly that civilization kind of drive or intelligence through the animal kingdom. But I do agree. I think March of the Ants is the more evolved form of that civilization building. So I'm going to go with March of the Ants as well.
I agree with both y'all.
Dominant Species is a better game.
Yeah. Oh man, see, aren't you glad I'm not doing that thing this year where I just pick a game I like and?
Well, we're always pretty good about it. We're very thematic. At the end of the day, it has to be the thematic version of that.
Yes, that's true. Alrighty. So next up we have the matchup between number 6, Manhattan Project Energy Empire, and number 3, The Great Zimbabwe. These are two of my favorite games. So I don't think in this case for me I'm gonna have one like I'd rather play this game and this one does it better. Like I like both of these games equally. So now I can just think about which does it better. I'll lead off here. I really like, Geof, you mentioned earlier, like there aren't enough games that explore civilizations outside of like the Eurocentric view. And it's designed by a couple of Europeans. But The Great Zimbabwe is unique in a lot of ways because it is about a civilization that is not within that, kind of sphere that we see in most Western civilization games. It's more economic than anything else, right? It's definitely designed around the economics of that space. It's not particularly pretty to look at because it's a splatter game. But I really appreciate kind of that variability that you have in terms of theme, the way they bring in the different gods from that pantheon, and those impact not just the theme of the game, but the way in which you play it. It affects the mechanics of each individual player. And then the types of things that you're actually producing are unique to those cultures. And then you're actually building up those monuments as part of the Great Zimbabwe. So that's my pick.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to go with you on that one for sure. To me, this one's not close. Manhattan Project Energy Empire is a really, really cool economic sort of Euro game with some pretty nifty player interaction. But Great Zimbabwe, there's so many things about it, right? So when you think about a civilization game, or I shouldn't say that. When I think about a civilization game, I'm thinking about certain touchstones, right? Building,
Hmm.
something should be growing, building, right? Which is again one of the reasons I went down with March of the Ants over Dominant Species, right? The answer literally building something, right?
Yes.
Some kind of cultural touchstone, right? I'm looking for some sort of cultural connection that I can latch on to. I'm looking for that kind of interaction and maybe a little bit of conflict. Um, I'm looking for, um, things that another thing to me is like trading, economies and trading, resource kind of management, extraction. All of those things kind of are tied up in what we think of when we think about civilization games. I'm using the royal we there again. I didn't mean to. Um, and then you have other cultural sides to it, literature and art and things of that nature, right? So the Great Zimbabwe, I just feel fills that. So many of those check boxes are marked off with the Great Zimbabwe. There are some that are not, but there are definitely quite a few that are. And that sense of building, of competition, of resources, limited resources, trying to gain access to those resources, trying to build that network to utilize it is just super super thematic to me. And I'm really there's I wish that they would have done a better job with the graphic presentation, but at the same
Yeah.
time, I understand if you're going for a modular board, if you're going
Yeah.
for this idea of um, a clean space to work with, right? So if I can do a brief aside real quick, like Dominant Species, I love the first edition. The first edition of Dominant Species, most people hated because it was just so bland, right? But when you're trying to figure out how many cubes are in a space, how many where's the cone, what's the relationship between these three different areas, who has dominance, who has majority, I don't want it prettied up with a bunch of stuff, right? And the later version of Dominant Species had beautiful forested green hexes and beautiful, flowing water and all this kind of stuff that just kind of made it harder to read the board. And I think that the Great Zimbabwe, because there's so many different things going on, in some ways I like the fact that it's kind of bland because then I'm really focused on what I need to be looking at and not the beautiful art, right? Like if the Great Zimbabwe had Zolkin style art, I have a feeling
Mm.
it would be so distracting to me. I would just be spending all my time staring at the beautiful art and not really paying attention to what I had to. So could the components be better? Yes. Could the art be better? Yes. But it's a small shop. They've put out some amazing games. I got to go with Zimbabwe.
All right. And I'll go with the Great Zimbabwe as well.
All right. Moving on there. All right. So last one on this side, and then I think we're going to cycle back to the top of this side, and then we'll probably pick up the pace, just since we already talked about all these. We have Mycelia. Again, wrong cover. My bad. Can't change it, so y'all just have to imagine. Game about building fungal networks, mushrooms, all that good stuff. And then Antiquity, another Splatter game. So we have kind of the from the 11th to the 17th century, the development. I believe they said they based it on like Italy, but just the
Yeah.
whole idea of like this small micro portion of a civilization, all the things that go into thinking about that, from where things are going to go to where you put your dead people, um, all that good stuff. So good matchup here. I know that's the best description you'll ever hear of Antiquity.
All right. So I'm going to try and take your cue and be shorter, right? So for me, it's Antiquity, hands down in this particular matchup, only because of all the things you mentioned. Like Antiquity for me, the first time I played it, I lost very quickly because my whole town was overwhelmed with graves, right? Like
Same.
everybody just died, right? And I
Yep.
was shocked that that's the way that game ended. Pollution, the way they handle
Yep.
pollution and resource exhaustion, brilliant. Never saw that in a game like that before. I thought
Still haven't.
that was
Yeah.
just unbelievably brilliant. Absolutely love that. Choosing your own victory condition, amazing, right? there are so many things about this game that I really enjoyed, and building up your little polyomino town there, and trying to figure out where the dead people go. Apparently, no one thought of cremation. Could have saved your civilization with cremation technology.
But
And,
that follows that religious Italian tradition
exactly right.
where the body's sacred,
Yep.
at least
Yep.
at that time.
Yep. You got to hang on to it, right? It's coming back with you. So you got to hang on to it. So yeah, I mean, I absolutely love that game.
Yeah, I've always loved the game. I think thematically it plays like a very dynamic Civ game for a splatter. I think that's their Civ game out there. And you also do have opportunities to pick your own technologies to kind of grow out and kind of make yourself unique. But also, as you mentioned, Geof, like the location of your cities and how you build other cities and how you block out other cities because you want to kind of reap those resources first. It's the most aggressive game that is not aggressive at all, right? There's no battling, fighting, killing, kind of that stuff. But oh yeah, you could starve somebody out or toxify their land. I am so glad that stuff has stopped now. They don't do that anymore. But shout out to Mycelia, like great network, big fan. It's pretty amazing. It's a really beautiful game too. Definitely should take a look at it. But I'm going to go to Antiquity here.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to that. I think Antiquity is a really interesting game, and we'll have, I think, a little more to say about it when it goes up against Great Zimbabwe here in a minute.
Ooh, splatter time!
Yep. All right, so we're back up to historicals.
There it comes.
Now we're matching off with into round 3. So again, we're going to do all the rounds on the left, and we'll go to the right. Through the Ages, our number 1 seed up against number 13, Sid Meier's Civilization, the board game.
Yeah, I got to go with Through the Ages, just because it was revolutionary. It's still a game that I own. It's still a game that I like to play. Civilization, Sid Meier's Civilization, I liked it when it came out. I thought the little rotating card system was really interesting. But that game was replaced for me by Clash of Cultures, right? Clash of Cultures did the map and the individualized civilizations better. So, with all apologies to that game, I'm going to stick with Through the Ages.
I'm going to go the opposite way here. As much as I do love Through the Ages, I do love a civilization that is a civilization to start off with. I do love the leader that's your civilization, the benefits of the culture, the map, and Through the Ages is just one of those most wonderfully insane technical puzzles that comes together beautifully. But I'm going to go Sid Meier's Civilization here.
Yeah, I mean, all the words you just said are why I would go with Through the Ages. It's crazy technical puzzle.
Yeah.
I love that.
You're a puzzle guy.
I am a puzzle guy. Yeah.
He is a puzzle guy.
Civilization, the board game, is very good. But the thing about that game that is difficult is that you really need the right combination of expansions layered over the top of the game. And it's got a little bit of overhead. I know Through the Ages is a very complex game, but it's also very intuitive once you get it down.
Sure.
Civilization, the board game, is a fantasy flight game with a bunch of stuff layered on top of it.
It's
a little rough to teach.
That's their business model.
Yeah. And the result of that is, A, if you buy this game now, good luck finding the expansions. They're like $200 a piece. And B, the base games, it's just kind of broken in a couple areas. So I'm going to go Through the Ages, New Story of Civilization. It also has an expansion, but you definitely don't need it.
But it's good, though.
It is good.
It's a very good expansion. And it has some great leaders in there, too.
Yeah. All right. Surprising no one. Through the Ages moves on. All right, we got the modern mega version of a classic, Mega Civilization, versus Clash of Cultures Monumental Edition.
So we're going by number of hours is going to be our pick of the game. That's you know.
Well, if we go by number of hours and it's Mega Civ, and I'm not picking Mega Civ. So.
I'm going to go with Clash of Cultures. You got all the miniatures on the map. You have really unique civilization building with the technology. It is a lot of, as Geof said, a lot of note taking because you have to keep up on everything there. But it can't possibly be as bad as 18 hours of Mega Civ.
To keep track of,
yeah, no.
I think Mega Civ's higher on my list of like games I'd like to play at least once in my
sure.
life. But
Yeah.
Clash of Cultures is so good. So yeah, same.
Yeah, no surprise here. Going for Clash of Cultures, already my self-identified favorite game. So yeah, definitely that's one that I would pick there.
All
All
right.
right.
So we are down to just a couple games on that half. Down to our lower half, the Wolves versus the Ants. March of the Ants.
I mean, certainly the new edition, March of the Ants, if we can compare the two, because I think that one really brings in more of the technology, civilization, map building than the original. It's a bigger map. It shows more of the chambers and things like that. So I'm going to go with March of the Ants, the new edition there.
Okay. I That's tough. I think I agree. I wanted the answer to be the Wolves, but I think
Mm,
because of the upgrades, like ants as a civilization are just fascinating to me.
yeah.
It's just a really weird species. Most insects are, but this one in particular, just like the way it operates, the queen based system, the different roles that they're born into
Yeah.
effectively, and like how that works and how they can transition between those, and like it's such an interesting, fascinating thing. And it works perfectly, I think, as a game, because you're gamifying that whole structure. So
Hmm.
March of the Ants for me too.
Yeah, I'm glad that you guys don't need me for that one because I was tempted to abstain on that because I haven't played the new edition. I've
Sure.
played March of the Ants exactly once.
Mm,
Okay.
And so I've played the Wolves multiple times. My gut told me that March of the Ants was probably more of a Civ feel than the Wolves, but I really don't think I had enough information to pick. So I'm glad you guys made it easy for me. Thank you.
Excellent.
awesome.
But now you have to go first here, Jeff.
Yeah, yeah. So now we've got the Great Zimbabwe. And so this is a tricky one because like I do struggle a little bit more to divorce like games I like from when we're doing these discussions. But the Great Zimbabwe, which is my favorite Splotter game, for all the reasons we talked about like
Mhm.
5-10 minutes ago,
Hmm.
versus Antiquity, which is such a fascinating design. Just in general, like all of Splotter designs are fascinating, but this one in particular, it's like they're very unique, different, and to this point, kind of nobody else has done it in a similar way. Look at what a civilization is and how it develops, and the things that need to be considered for it to be healthy. Um, so yeah, go ahead, Jeff. I don't know.
Yeah, this is another one where I really don't know where to go. Zimbabwe plays faster.
Yep.
Zimbabwe is, I think, a tighter game.
Hmm.
Um, Zimbabwe has all the things that I kind of talked about, those touchstones. But man, the resource thing, the pollution thing, the polyomino, like Princes of Florence thing, man, it's a really tough call for me. My heart wants me to go with Zimbabwe because it's an underrepresented theme and a phenomenal game. And Antiquity is just like you said, Italian city states, yay. But there are so many things about Antiquity that I'm going to go with Antiquity. I'm going to go with Antiquity. Close call, though. Close call.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that.
Go for
Yeah.
it.
Ah.
Whose heart are you going to break? Who you giving the rose to?
I again, like Anthony said, I'm trying to divorce my own feelings for the game, from the kind of pick and trying to figure out which is, more thematic. I think Antiquity is less abstracted. Although I do appreciate the fact, as you said, Jeff, the Great Zimbabwe being abstracted does so to its benefit.
Right.
Um, I I think Anthony, you made a comment last week that even though certainly this is a well-deserved place and there should be more games of this type in tabletop gaming, it is developed by Europeans. There isn't a lot of not as enough cultural elements in the Great Zimbabwe that kind of should have been, or it seems like it would be, because again, it's very abstracted out. Whereas Antiquity, even though it is sadly a lot in a way more of the same, it is unique in its kind of thematic presentation of generations, not just the city grew up, and it's not Sim City. It is
Right.
generations of family being born, building, living, dying, generations coming up, so forth and so on. So you're keeping track in your I don't know, what is it, notary, where the generations of family are there as well, and the graves. So I'm gonna go to Antiquity.
All right, Antiquity it is. Yeah, like I almost feel like part of me was like, I think I would go with Great Zimbabwe, but I want it to be Antiquity because I think that's a better choice. I'm glad that's what you guys chose. It's really
It's a
hard
tough
to
one.
separate the two.
It's
Yeah.
a really tough one, and I think it's it's interesting to me because I think it's following a theme. I think Great Zimbabwe is a better game. I think when you look at from a mechanical standpoint, how it plays, how well balanced it is and tight it is because of how they worked out. I think they took ideas from Antiquity with you choose your patron, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And they did it again in Zimbabwe, but I think they did it better. I think they balanced it better in Zimbabwe, and I think Zimbabwe with a tighter playing time, less fiddly, less rules overhead. I think it's a better game. But when you're talking about civilization, right? I think Antiquity maybe does some of those things a little bit better. It's just such a tough call.
Yeah.
I mean, one day or many days, they'll both get Lucky Duck kind of upgrades, and I think a lot more people will get to see the genius in both of those games out there.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, same. Yeah, Great Zimbabwe especially, like that. It's always been tough because that is one of my favorite games. This is my top 10, and it's just you put that on the table, people are like, okay, like at least with Food Chain Magnet you get the cool cover art, but on Great Zimbabwe, like what is
Yeah.
this? So I'm with you. All right, so now it's time to pick the winner of our historical bracket. We have Through the Ages, which was number 1, versus Clash of Cultures, which was number 2. The seeding, of course, which is based on the Board Game Geek rankings. Yeah, this one's tough. Got a little more abstract, it's card based, no map, versus the as we've talked about, like the perfect version of the map based Civ game from a modern perspective. Yeah, what do y'all think? Chris, why don't you start? Because I feel like I know what Jeff's leaning.
It's the perfect civilization map building. Shouldn't say map building game, but it's more a mathematical puzzle that if you play it on the app, certainly it benefits from the app play because there is a lot to manage, and that does give you a general feel of managing the civilization's resources, when to upgrade, how to deal with your military, how to deal with your expansions. So I think as far as games are concerned, Through the Ages profoundly taps everything along the way about civilizations, right? You have the politics that come into play, the new technologies, how the actual leaders through the different civilization, the different generations die out. So it's not like you have, Aristotle with you until the modern age. Like at some point he passes away and you have to have a new leader for your civilization. Class of Cultures, again, as far as having that embodied in figures, in a map, on the board, and having those figures in the map and the resources provides an extra level of kind of the dynamics. It really does feel, for me, a civilization game is all about the growth, whether it's a tech tree or it's the expansion, or it's the upgrades that might get. I think Clash of Cultures certainly does that probably best, especially with the Monumental Edition. I think if we were dealing with the base edition, I think it's a little lackluster, especially with the miniatures, because again, back in the day, those board game miniatures were not as grand and the map wasn't as profound, and it didn't have the expansion to it as well too. But you actually get unique buildings here, and you get to build out. So I'm going to go Clash of Cultures. I think it's something that I have to thematically. I think Through the Ages is just a little too clean and a little too. It's just too clean. It's not a bad thing about the game. It's just a little clean for me.
Okay. This is an interesting one for me because as much as you've heard me talk about Through the Ages and praise Through the Ages, to me this isn't even close. Clash of Cultures. All right, so Clash of Cultures to me does everything that I like about Through the Ages, but better. And I think it's because of the growth factor that Chris was talking about, seeing the cities grow, different city pieces giving you different things. It's, just in the same way that like you have a card that says you have a theater, you have an arena, you have a lab, you have a library. Okay, cool. I'm seeing that city grow on the board, getting that same kind of an effect, but with extra stuff layered on top of it. With my favorite part of it being Clash of Cultures, as far as I can think of, is the only game that has used the idea of cultural influence as a form of aggressiveness. And I absolutely love that. I think it's one of the most brilliant parts of the design. There is war, but there's also the war of ideas, right? There's
Yeah,
also the war
soft
of,
power.
that and everything else about, the progression. You do still get that feeling of micromanaging your civilization with Clash of Cultures because of that ridiculous tech tree in front of you, and how you choose to develop that, and how you choose to handle that and manage it. And all the bookkeeping involved with it is the same as the bookkeeping of Through the Ages. Do I have enough smiley faces? Am I going to fall into corruption? Do I have? So to me, it's like Through the Ages is a very important game in the hobby, and I still enjoy playing it. Clash of Cultures to me just takes everything that Through the Ages kind of that I liked about it, and then just amplifies it, magnifies it, and turns it into something that I think is even greater.
All right, awesome. Yeah, I think I agree with what we're both saying, and even if I didn't, I'd be outvoted. So, Clash of Cultures. Moving on.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and now a really weird matchup: March of the Ants versus Antiquity. This one's easy for me because now we have a splatter game versus a non-splatter game, and they're both Civ games. So I'm going to go with Antiquity. We talked about it at length just a couple minutes ago, but it does so many interesting, cool, different things in the space that other games are not doing.
Chris, I'm deferring to you, Chris, because again, March of the Ants, I've really only played once.
Yeah, for me as well, I think it's Antiquity. If you've never played Antiquity, I recommend taking a look at the Board Game Geek page and going to take a look at the images. The number of little cardboard chits that comes with that game, just that alone.
It's bananas. Yeah,
you almost need tweezers to play that game on the table.
You do,
but for very good reason, because a lot of things go into civilizations, and it does feel like you're growing. It does feel like you're building out. And again, maybe not culturally soft power, but certain, especially back in the day, control of nature and that destruction of nature and that taking of resources. Right? We all have played so many games out there where someone gets to a spot first and takes the resource or the resources, like in any kind of worker placement game. But only in Antiquity are you not just taking the resources, but you're basically salting the land, and you're like, ha, and your neighbor's like, damn it. And yeah, that's usually how that goes. So,
yep.
And that's a real thing.
Fallow. Yep. Let that lie fallow for a generation, and
yeah, that's right.
Get something from it, because I chopped down all those trees.
That's right. And that there's real consequences to that as well out there. So Antiquity, my friends, Antiquity.
All right, let's see what our lovely software tells us to do. All right, so on the left side, and this will go into the final, and we'll go to the right side. We have Clash of Cultures versus Antiquity.
Clash of Cultures. I'll just stop there. Clash of Cultures. I've talked it up.
Yeah, I think I agree. I love Antiquity. It's I think I love the idea of what Antiquity's doing. It's very interesting. It's fascinating. It's very abstract in a lot of interesting ways. It's a splatter game. It's great. I love Clash of Cultures for all of the same types of things, and it's a really fun game, and I'd rather play it. So Clash of Cultures for me.
I'm gonna give it to Clash of Cultures just because it's not just one culture; it's cultures.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
So I'm gonna go there for that.
All right. So now we are, as we've said, we've filled in the left side of the bracket. We have Clash of Cultures is up against something else from the sci-fi and fantasy side. We're gonna get there. So I'm gonna fill.
I'm like all old and stuff. You guys, it's my fault. I talk too much. Anyway,
That's all right,
go
man.
ahead.
So I'm going to fill these in real quick because last week we did go through this first batch. So we had Twilight Imperium beat out It's a Wonderful World. We had Empires of the Void 2 beat out High Frontier for All. Star Trek Ascendancy over Gangopolis. We had Revive beat out Roll for the Guy. I had to double check. I'm like, did it? Really? Okay, it did. We had Underwater Cities over Beyond the Sun. We had Eclipse over Boone Lake. Of course we did. And then we had Andromeda's Edge over Apiary. Boo, Space Bees. Gaia Project over Alien Frontiers. Onto the fantasy side, we had Terra Mystica beat out Battle Mist. We had Dwellings of Eldervale over Everdell. Hyperborea, I believe.
That's an oldie.
I don't know. No, Northgard won that one.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah.
Little flashback for y'all. Cyclades versus Deus. We had Cyclades. And then Monumental over Civolution. Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea over Might and Magic. And Mare Nostrum Empires over Rune Wars. And Small World over Tapestry.
All right.
So now we can dive into this whole side of things. Now, let's see here. We have, first up, the number one, Twilight Imperium 4, or whatever, versus Empires of the Void, which is our number 9. So, I'll kick it off here. I think this is an easy one. Twilight Imperium 4th edition is, it's the epic, right? We talk about these game experiences and development and feeling like you're building something and growing and living through something. And the thing about science fiction civ games is that you're often stepping into one that's been around for a very long time and all the baggage that comes with that. And TI4 handles that in really interesting ways. So that's my pick.
Yeah, I think a TI4. I do adore Empires of the Void too, but I think it's a game that certainly continues to live in the shadow of TI4 because it perfectly embodies that kind of 4X element that you do see in a lot of civ games.
Yeah, this is a tough one for me because I really enjoy a lot of Ryan's games, and I do enjoy Empires of the Void. The idea of sort of negotiating alliances with planets as opposed to just taking them over. Really liked that idea. There's a lot of things about that game that I really, really enjoy. What puts Twilight Imperium over the top for me, I guess, is the politics phase, right? The whole idea of, I think Twilight Imperium is the first one that I can remember, unless maybe the Republic of Rome, where the table is basically passing new rules that we all have to follow, and we're negotiating that, and we're voting on that, and we're trying to, So I think I got to go with Twilight Imperium. With a shout out to Empires of the Void for the fact that it's really playable and playable in a reasonable amount of time.
It's my favorite Ryan Lockett game.
Okay. All right. Yep. It's definitely one of, I think, his best. And so, I feel you, but got to go with TI4, I guess.
All right. TI4 moving up. Next up, we have the number 5 on the list, Star Trek Ascendancy, up against number 13, Revive. So we've got the ultimate Star Trek 4X game versus Revive, which is about rebuilding, literally reviving civilization 5,000 years in the future. And it is all the Euro of Euro-ness for you there.
And that's where I'm gonna hijack this one, guys. Is Revive for me is very similar to Zolkin, right?
Sure.
Mechanically super sound, very interesting. Thematically, I just don't buy it. I don't know. I think it's you're racing to get to the corners. You got the weird skull things. You got
Yeah.
I don't get it, right? Now that being said, Star Trek Ascendancy is more sort of a direct head-to-head conflict kind of a game. It to me, it's almost more of a dudes on a map game. Like it's getting its cultural veneer from the shows, right? It's leaning on those, I think, and just making some real broad strokes over. Well, this race, or this group, the Klingons are more warlike, and the Romulans are sneaky, and so it's kind of leaning on those tropes from Star Trek. And Star Trek, I grew up with it. I love it. I still love Star Trek. But I guess I got to go with Star Trek Ascendancy. I don't know. I wish that there was just a little bit more meat on the bone than in Ascendancy, but Revive to me is just a very, very good, but very mechanical experience. And it's not anything that I would think of as a Civ game.
I'm going to go with Star Trek Ascendancy 2. Again, big Star Trek fan, but not for that reason. Because I think a couple things you said, Geof, which is, yes, it does pull very directly from the show, and it is very much troops on the map, and it follows those very kind of stereotypical race elements. But one of the other things you said earlier about liking about Civilization games in comparison to kind of a typical just 4X game is you can take over civilizations or control civilizations based upon culture, based upon soft power. The Federation does that often. There's also like the Kardashians who do all the really negative kind of Nazi-esque kind of stuff.
No.
Well, they're Nazis.
No. You said the Kardashians, and it's
Cardassians. Yeah,
same totally difference. Different race.
Nah, same difference. Actually,
totally different race they're like an offshoot of the Borg, like surgically augmented in other ways, perhaps.
The Kardashians are far more evil than the Cardassians.
I couldn't let it go, Chris.
No, it's fine. No worries.
I heard the Kardashians. I was like, wait a minute.
No, when I was thinking evil Nazis, I immediately went to the Kardashians, where the Cardassians obviously had a rationale for their warlike kind of growth. But again, you do have the soft power, you do have the cultural victories, you do have trading in that game. You can trade between the civilizations as well. You can lose trading with civilizations based upon wars that take place. The space lanes matter, how you kind of build out your civilization, and each of the planets already in most cases already have some level of civilization already built there. So again, then your civilization, like if you're the Federation, you may not be allowed to kind of just take over that planet. So there is some extra elements to it. So Star Trek Ascendancy, with or without the Kardashians, it's fine by me. I don't like that. I personally don't like that expansion, but to each his own.
Yeah. All right, Star Trek it is.
There you
Kardashians
go.
and all. All right,
Ooh,
next up we have the rare sci-fi that's not in space, Underwater Cities, versus Eclipse: Second Dawn for the Galaxy, which kind of falls into the same category with a lot of the stuff we said about Twilight Imperium. A little more on the Euro side, though.
Yes.
So I find this interesting matchup. From my side, I like Underwater Cities for a couple of reasons. One is we talk about the growth element, we talk about the development element, we talk about having like your own space, and there's the purely economic component of it, but you're also building up a tableau of different abilities and different cards and different individuals within that space who are representing it. It is more mechanical as a functional Euro, right? So it is leaning more into the mechanics of getting these resources and building up this type of plant to produce this type of resource to be able to build up this other type of plant or feed your people or whatever it is you need to do. But it does feel ultimately like you're building up this underwater civilization. You have multiple cities; they're all networked together. They're doing something unique, especially if you have the expansion and have like the modular player boards. You can even play with the expansion where you were going down and like extracting those ruins and finding these little bits that have been left behind by previous civilizations. So yeah, I love Eclipse. I think it's fantastic, but it's it's 4X in space, but it's a little more Euro-y. And so when you have these two Euros together, I like the uniqueness of the underwater component.
Yeah, both very good. Both accomplish very much that same kind of civilization building elements to it. Eclipse does lean obviously much heavier towards just the general 4X troops on the map kind of situation, where domination of other civilizations is the victory condition. Where underwater cities, it is physically building up your own underwater city and having the most prosperous city production wise typically versus the other players at the tables. A very, very tight kind of competition. I could almost coin flip this. But I think I'm going to go underwater cities, despite the fact that Eclipse has such a robust tech tree that goes along with it too.
This is a hard one for me because I really love Underwater Cities. It's one of my favorite games. I got all the cool upgraded components for it and just absolutely love it. Eclipse should be the winner here, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is definitely that sort of prototypical different races of, alien species and different advantages and disadvantages and exploration and tech trees and all of this stuff. I have Eclipse. I'm looking at it right now. It's a great game. I really do enjoy it. Where Eclipse falls apart for me is kind of what you said, Chris, which is it has a wonderful tech tree of every military thing that you could possibly imagine, and some really cool resource kind of extraction bonus things, and like a couple of things related to monoliths and a couple of things related to non-combat development. But the vast bulk of the technology in Eclipse is all about making my ships bigger and better than your ships, faster than your ships. And it usually does come back to a much more combat oriented game. And I'm looking for something a little bit more. And I've always been looking for more than that in Eclipse. And I keep hoping that maybe someday they'll add a layer to it that will maybe incorporate more of the trading or the negotiation the way TI4 does. But I think I'm going to have to go with Underwater Cities as well.
All right, Underwater Cities, moving on there. Next up, we have a relatively recent release, just last fall, Andromeda's Edge. So the space version of Luke Laurie's worker placement game, which we'll talk about Bowling's Valderrail here in a few minutes, versus Gaia Project, which is the space version of a fantasy game that we'll talk about here in a few minutes. So the fantasy side and the sci-fi side have a little mirroring going on here. Interesting matchup for sure. Chris, I know you have a clear preference in game, but like, what is your thought on the theming?
I do like Andromeda's Edge much more. The opportunity to play as a unique species, race, civilization, and the fact that Andromeda's Edge has so many civilizations, and that those civilizations do have a unique special ability, and that the ships, both in order to colonize planets and also warships, tactical, different effects, leaders that are on the board that come into play with your developments on the board, is pretty strong. Gaia Project certainly benefits from more of a growth and expansion of your particular civilization on the board. It certainly does have its own tech tree, and I would almost believe I know that we'll talk about Elders, dwelling of Eldervale in a minute, but Gaia Project with those tracks, very similar to Andromeda's Edge with the technology tracks as well. So both of them track. I don't know which one tracks better. Gaia Project, you don't start with a unique particular race. You just grow.
Well, you do, but they have the one special ability. But there are like
it's
14 of them in the box.
Yeah, and it's a little more dynamic with the Andromeda's Edge as far as different race specific, and also the ships have special abilities.
Right.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna go Gaia's Project here because I do think that it is a little more substantial on the Civ building side of it, whereas Andromeda's Edge does have Civ built into it, but it is certainly obviously a more definitive worker placement game.
Sure.
But you can talk me out of it.
Yeah.
No, you're locked in now.
You can talk me out of it.
You can't talk you out of anything.
I could try. I could try. So, yeah, Andromeda's Edge I really, really enjoy for a lot of the reasons that you say. And one of the things that I like about Andromeda's Edge is that it's not racing up tracks really for the techs, because the techs are coming from different categories, and you're really getting the ability to customize certain aspects of what you can do in the game depending on the text that you're getting and the focus that you want to take. It's got a little bit of that exploration thing going on, which is kind of cool. It's got the differentiation with the ships, which I really enjoy. It's got some really unique combat sort of systems baked into it, which I really enjoy. I think it's definitely got a little that narrative arc to it. I like the idea, as you said, of sacrifice to make these monuments, these different buildings that you can kind of build. So all of that to me, I really, really enjoy. Gaia Project is to me like if Dominant Species and Tolkien had a love child, right? Because you have the Gaia Project, just like Terra Mystica, has that I'm adapted to this environment.
Yeah.
This is the environment where I can do best. And in Dominant Species, you're trying to evolve to fit into different environments, but in Gaia Project and in Terra Mystica, you are forcing the environment to change to you, okay? Mm-hmm. Which leans back a little bit towards that, hey, people shape their environment. There really shouldn't be a city known as Las Vegas. It makes no sense for it to be there. Los Angeles shouldn't be there. You watch Chinatown, you understand. So like there's that aspect that I like, but and Gaia Project, believe me, does a better job with those tech tracks than Terra Mystica does by far.
It does.
Really enjoy that. Does a much better job than Dwellings of Eldervale by far. Okay. But I think I got to go with Andromeda's Edge. I think Andromeda's Edge just has more modularity to it in a lot of ways. With the races, with the techs, with the management of the ships as the workers, but then the workers are differentiated because the ships are differentiated. There's just a lot going on that I really enjoy. Plus, I'm lucky enough I got the stupid all-in edition. So the miniatures are insane and it's just a beautiful table presence. But I think just from the story that Andromeda's Edge tells, I like that more.
I'm with you, man. The Chinatown reference, you got me. So. and we put Chris on the losing side with Gaia Project of all games.
That's I know.
Funny. Yeah.
Yep. But no, for all those reasons, I totally agree. This is a tough one for me. I do think Gaia Project is a little bit more of a Civ game than maybe we might otherwise think. But at the same time, it's Andromeda's Edge. I don't know. I agree in terms of how it's approaching things, the modularity of it, the presence, etc.
All right.
Chris, did you change your mind?
I'm going to go Andromeda's Edge. You turned my mind.
All right. I want to be on the winning side. All right. And because of funniness, Terra Mystica versus Dwellings of Eldervale. Same conversation.
Well, I mean, but this one to me is really interesting because of these two. I think I prefer Terra Mystica. And yeah, it's weird because Dwellings, it's the whole like the monster sort of system doesn't make as much sense as the Andromeda's Edge alien system.
Right.
The tracks in Dwellings of Eldervale don't make a lot of sense. Putting the building on the hat of my meeple just bothers me.
I love the hats. It's
Oh
great.
my
It
gosh,
doesn't make any sense, but it's
makes no
funny.
sense whatsoever. Terra Mystica, like again, like I know I just like seem to be knocking the system, but I really do like Gaia Project. I own it. I also own Terra Mystica with the Fire and Ice expansion because I think that's kind of essential, right? So the things about Terra Mystica that I really like are the buildings
Hmm.
and the way the buildings are kind of functioning like the differentiated workers in Dwellings and in Andromedas and the different bonuses. But to me, the tightrope of Terra Mystica is when I put this out, I'm putting this back.
Mm.
And by putting that back, I'm pressuring myself. And it's that push and pull of a very painful organic growth
Hmm.
that I find very fascinating. Another tip towards the okay, maybe you're more Civ is the fact that in Terra Mystica, for example, if you want to build a trading house, it's beneficial to be up against other people, right? Like it's going to be easier for you to build that when someone is adjacent to it, right? Because that's who you're going to be trading with. That's who you're going to be interacting with, right? You can build a beautiful, uh, uh, sort of bunch of products that you want to sell and barter and trade with another culture. But if you put it way out in the middle of nowhere, no one's going to know where it is. It's not going to be as and so I like that Terra Mystica encourages you to interact with each other, even though in a very Euro-y way. There's something about that I like a lot. Whereas Dwellings of Eldervale to me didn't feel as Civ-like as Andromeda's Edge did for me. So I would go with Terra Mystica on this one, oddly enough.
The funny thing is I 100% agree, and I thought people were going to give me grief because I was like, we picked Andromeda's Edge.
Well,
I'm
they
like,
very
no,
well
Terra
might.
Mystica.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of you two. People out there, I don't know. We love you all, but um, yeah, the thing about Dwellings of Eldervale, and I love this game. It was on my top 50 for as long as Andromeda's Edge didn't exist. But the scope is a lot smaller, and
Mhm.
when it tries to expand that scope, it doesn't really make as much thematic sense. I mean, it does because it's a fantasy world and everything makes thematic sense, but Andromeda's Edge, it feels like you're part of this larger structure in this world, and you're exploring and you're fighting these old things and you're interacting with these other, races and species. Whereas in Dwellings of Eldervale, it's a fantasy world, and hey, look, there's a giant monster, and hey, look, I have this magic power now, and hey, look at this. Um, it's cool because you don't have a lot of fantasy games that do that because they are very static, and that is the trick I think of fantasy as a genre is that it is intentionally static. So having something that shows growth and development and civilization and and interaction between those spaces is very difficult. I think Eldervale shows that, whereas Terra Mystica kind of goes against that. So I agree. That's what I'm saying.
Dwellings.
Well, you want to be consistent? Come on.
Yeah, I'm going with Dwellings. I think the building aspect to it
Mm,
and the engagement with the technology, but in this case, it'd be the magic
right.
system that you're able to kind of put together. The Gaia Project kind of is more of a Civ game for me than Terra Mystica is.
Oh, that's
But
funny.
I do agree that Dwellings is a lesser Civ game than Andromeda's Edge.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like Dwellings is still more of a Civ game than Terra Mystica in that case.
Terra Mystica is.
There you go.
All right. Next up, we have Northgard, Uncharted Lands. So we've got, Norse mythology, building up a Viking civilization, versus Cyclades. And this is the cover for the new, what is it, the Titan Edition? Is what they're calling it?
Yeah, it's the edition I don't own.
Yes. Big, expensive one with new art. So here we have two mythological-based Civish games, which is most of the rest of these on this list.
Well, they're magical. They're magic civilizations built in, built in a historical context with magic that goes along with it, which is fair because even if we don't believe in those pantheons, the people of those times did, and
Right.
believe that those gods and magics and powers and myths actually did live and exist either within them or within nature.
Sure.
This is just the embodiment of it out there in the game table.
Yeah.
So, and that does play a very big role, I think, in almost every Civ game, that mythology and religion is part of those games a lot of times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this just literalizes it
Yes.
in a fun way, right?
Mhm.
And for me on this one, I really like Cyclades for how it does that,
Yeah.
because the way you interact with the gods, like the people are almost second thought, right? They're like, oh, there's people out there, they're growing their civilizations, but the way the game plays out is similar to me in like how you'd read the Odyssey or the Iliad. We're like, yeah, there's people out there, they're doing stuff, but they're pawns on a board, right?
Yes.
Where the gods are really, they're the ones pushing things around. There's the reason where the auction is for their powers, not for like, Ajax or Achilles. And it's just really, it's dudes on a map for sure, game wise, but at the same time, it's, showing that development of that civilization within that, tiny space in a really interesting way.
Well, once again, you guys have bailed me out because I have not had the opportunity to play Northgard, so I don't know anything about it. I have played Cyclades and have enjoyed it. I kind of like that marriage of the auction game and the dudes on a map game. Um, it's got the expansion, it's got the conflict, it's got quite a few things that I think people would think of when they think of civilization games. I don't generally think of it as a civ game, but I can understand why you would. And it certainly has those cool cultural sort of ties to it that you talked about. Northgard, I don't know anything about. So if I had to vote, I'd have to vote for the only one I know, and I don't really want to do that. So I'm glad that you guys had some consensus about that. So
Sure.
yeah, it looks like Cyclades moves along.
Yeah, it's got economics and it's got buildings in it, so it fits that kind of
Yeah.
area.
Check and check.
Yeah.
All right. Next up, we have Monumental, which is again like fantasy, not fantasy. I mean, it's pantheons and mythological, so therefore fantasy approach to kind of a civish 4X kind of game versus Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea, which is a pure 4X approach within the fantasy space, which is relatively rare. It was hard to find when building this list, but it's big, it's epic, it's large in scope, lots of different expansions, different races, different ways to approach it. It's yeah, so there you go. We have so I was trying to find the numbers and I can't find them, but number 11 Monumental versus number 3 Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea.
Yeah, Monumental has the different forgive me here, Geof, clash of cultures, different actual cultures in play. Obviously, the expansions bring in some more of the fantasy kind of cultures into play. Each of the cultures have particular cultural powers and benefits and weaknesses. There's also an actual really well-defined map with different types of land areas, resources to kind of grow. There's buildings and technology that goes into play. The tableau building of cards, how you interact with the card deck that you kind of put together, and how that kind of triggers off each other. Very dynamic, and again, it has really quality kind of figures. And with all the expansions, a lot of different races that you can play from all the different areas around the globe, which is nice to see.
Well, my thoughts about this are pass because I have played neither of these.
Oh, you should play both of them.
Yeah, I haven't had the chance. I've heard of Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea. I've seen it a few times. It's a Gameland game. I think it's Scott Alms, isn't it? Or
yeah, it's his big epic
yeah.
one.
So it's definitely something that I would be interested in trying. Monumental, I honestly really hasn't ever really crossed my radar. So
yeah, you should take a look at the pictures for that. I think you'll be impressed by it.
Cool. Yeah, no, these are two that are intriguing, but I haven't had the chance to play them.
Yeah. I mean, so Chris, did you pick one?
Pick Monumental.
Okay.
It's monumental, Anthony.
It is monumental.
Yeah.
It's a monumental game. Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with that as well. It's the one I've played the most.
Yeah.
Heroes of Lantern Sea, it's big, it's long, it's hard to get to the table. And at the same time, monumental kind of builds into the tropes of the Civ genre in ways that I find interesting. Whereas Heroes of Lantern Sea, it is more of a pure 4X game. It's dudes on a map, and there are systems in there that feel Civ building, but it's not really. You're not building and growing. You're just fighting with each other.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm down with monumental. All right, last one here, and then we'll rapid fire through the rest to get our finalists. Mare Nostrum Empires, which is our number 7 versus number 2 Small World.
Both of these games are my top 100, and they're pretty high up. Both of these games are great Civ games. Small World built on Vinci. The idea of having these fantasy races with special powers based on their race, based on their technique, they come into play. They benefit off a number of things on the board. They go into decline. You bring out another race. Obviously, there's already races in decline on the board, and you're dealing with other races on this very small world board. Mare Nostrum, fantastic game from Academy Games. It has fantasy elements as far as the different characters from folklore and mythology that come into play, but it is a very standard looking, and in some cases plain historical civilization building game of different civilizations growing up. You have economic win, you have a trade win, you have a military win, and you also have the monuments win as well. So there's a lot of ways to kind of play. Mostly military action on the board, but again, military win is only one of several ways in which you can play the game. Almost an impossible pick for me, to be honest with you, but what does certainly lean more toward the Civ game is the Mare Nostrum Empires.
Yeah, I think I'm going to agree with you there. Small World is certainly a fun game. It's a game that I've enjoyed. Played that early in my sort of second life as a board gamer. But Mare Nostrum, I think really, again, if I'm looking for something that I'm going to show to somebody and say, this is a civilization game,
Yeah,
it's probably going to be that one for all the reasons you said. And the things that stand out to me are the ones you highlighted, which is the different win conditions.
yes.
Which I really appreciate because, again, it goes towards giving you as a player different paths that you can follow and diverse approaches, which I think is really cool. Small World, I kind of think of more as a skirmish game. And I do like the thematic of this little civilization rises and then goes into decline and then gradually might even disappear from, the world and fade into the past. But it's so fast and it's so quick that I don't really get that feeling from a sort of a civilization building standpoint, because the sum of my building is putting out more of my people.
Yes.
And so, yes, they have different abilities. Yes, there are a vast number of different races, which you could say are different civilizations, right? Yes, they go into decline and there's an ebb and a flow, and there is a shared space that you're competing over. But all of the other sort of hallmarks for me, that the touch points or whatever for Civ games aren't necessarily there in Small World, but they are there in Mare Nostrum. So I'm going to go with that one.
All right. Great. You guys bailed me out this time. I've played each of these once, and I was like, yeah, Mare Nostrum looks like more of a Civ game. So I will agree with you on that one. All right. So we're going to rapid fire down here because we're closing in on the 2-hour mark, which is pretty long for us. Yeah. So less than a minute here. Twilight Imperium 4 versus Star Trek Ascendancy. What you got?
Star Trek Ascendancy because of soft power and trade.
Yeah, this is a hard one. I've played Twilight Imperium more. I think I'm going to have to go with Twilight Imperium because of the politics phase and all of that I really love the grand scope of it, I think.
I also agree. Twilight Imperium 4, politics phase, the general, just the way the agendas work, and the civilizations themselves, and how they feel like you're stepping into something that's kind of in a lived-in world. TI4. All right, Underwater Cities versus Andromeda's Edge.
Another really hard pick. You are actually building up your civilization with actual buildings, which is great. Both have really great technology tracks that you build throughout. Andromeda's Edge, obviously pushing the edge of the civilization it's growing into. Underwater
That.
Cities, you're expanding out in the deep ocean. I think from just a purely Civ kind of feel, I think Underwater Cities, because you're playing over different generations and then only reaping the rewards of that building at the end of that kind of civilization building era.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and I do get your feeling about the building up over generations, over time, improvements, and all that fun stuff. Your tableau that you're building up. But what Underwater Cities is lacking is any form of interaction with anybody else.
Fair.
And because of that, I got to go with Andromeda's Edge, I think.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I was kind of on the fence between these two. They were both equal in my head. You know, I got these Euros. They both have these Civ elements to them. They're both kind of fantastical without being too crazy. But yeah, the lack of interaction in Underwater City is, other than like the worker placement part, which is the least civil part of the game.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'll go with Andromeda's Edge as well. All right. Next up, we have Terra Mystica versus Cyclades.
I'm going to go with Cyclades again, just because, again, even though there is the fantastical elements to it, it does come down to economics and buildings. And it's a little less abstract, oddly, whereas Terra Mystica, you have to build buildings in a certain pattern and row.
I'm going to go with Terra Mystica myself. We talked a lot of the reasons just a few minutes ago, but the you starting with the unique race and kind of building towards something, the interaction between players, kind of thematic to the nature of a civilization and how you trade, and you're vying for land, and kind of the flow that comes out of that, especially with the expansion materials.
Oi. I don't know. This is a hard one. I think I'm gonna have to go with I think I'm gonna have to go with Cyclades on this one because the tracks in Terra Mystica. Oh God, I hate those.
The priest track, yeah, they're terrible.
Yeah,
it's the least technological or mythological track there could be.
Yeah. It's just one step removed. Yeah, and again, that direct interaction and you're competing in Terra Mystica, but you're never actually punching anybody in the face. Yeah, I got to go with Cyclades. Yeah.
I think you're mute, Anthony.
Yep.
We've got Monumental.
There you go.
People watching are like, I know what he's talking about. Monumental versus Mario Nostrum Empires. Sorry to the audio listeners.
It was very impassioned.
Yes, I was gesticulating wildly.
Yes.
It mute, but wildly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna go with is it Mare or Mare? I don't know which it is.
That's a good question.
I thought it was Mare, but I could be wrong. So Mare Nostrum Empires. Either way, no matter how you say it, that's the one I'm gonna go with because that's the one I know.
Sure.
And because it's definitely got that older traditional style of civilization games that I appreciate as an older person.
There you go. Anthony, what about you?
The tough one. Again, comes down to like I played each of these once. Both were good experiences. Enjoyed both games. But trying to think back on like which one kind of fits the bill best for me. Monumental feels more like isolated to the different potential like layout of the game you're playing. Mare Nostrum is it's just the scope is built into the game itself. So I'm gonna go with Mare Nostrum.
Same here.
Same. Love it. All right. All right. So we have Twilight Imperium 4th edition versus Andromeda's Edge. This is for the sci-fi bracket victory.
I'm throwing in with Andromeda's Edge just because I feel like there's good arguments on both sides because they both have civilization elements that come into play. What I do like is the Andromeda's Edge. I think the civilization, the buildings, the actual development buildings, and the leaders for those development buildings are essential to victory. You can't win that game unless outside weird kind of situation if you don't build development, if you don't have those technology buildings. So it plays a little bit more, and you also still have fighting on top of it as well.
Sure.
Yeah, this is a tough one for me. Andromeda's Edge, I get that to the table. Like I get to play that. I get to actually have that experience. Twilight Imperium 4, I've played once. I played TI3 twice. The original TI once. And they were all very memorable games, but so is Andromeda's Edge. Oh man, yeah, I think I'm, much as I keep talking about this politics phase and all this grand scope, I think I'm going to have to go with Andromeda's Edge on this one.
Oh, that hurts. That hurts my soul.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry, I betrayed you.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, yeah, I love Andromeda's Edge. I'm happy for it to be the victor here. Twilight Imperium for me is a game I've been very lucky to be able to play a fair amount over the last few years. I have a feeling for it. I've played half of the races in the box, and so I have like internalized some of the lore and some of the world building, and I don't know, it's just like a story comes out of it every time I play it, and it really does feel like a Civ game in the same way as any of these other, classical Civ games do. But there are a lot of barriers there for sure, and especially if you don't play it very often, it does lean more mechanical. I definitely understand that.
Sure,
because you're just like, what am I trying to accomplish? What am I trying to move around? You can't focus on all those pieces as much. So I get it. Andromeda's Edge is very good too.
Yeah, and Twilight Imperium 4, it's military, right?
It is, but it doesn't have to be strictly. Like, you're going to have to do military things in the game, but the whole genius of that game is like the way the victory point conditions work and the cards that you have.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't have to do military stuff. You can turtle up and do other cool stuff, and I love that. But all right, Andromeda's Edge, our pick on the sci-fi side, which again, full disclaimer, I love it. Good game. Happy it's there. All right, and on the fantasy side, we have Cyclades up against Mare Nostrum Empires.
All right, Chris, where you landing?
Yeah.
It's a rough one. Love both of these, but I think Mare Nostrum Empires is more of a dedicated Civ game, where Cyclades leans a little bit more towards 4X kind of battling kind of side. There's actually names of places on there too.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree with that pretty much entirely. Is kind of where I was going to go with it too. Yeah.
Okay. Great. That makes it easy. Can rely on you guys on this one because again, I haven't played it as much as I'd like to. Mare Nostrum Empire is the winner on the fantasy side. All right. So getting our second finalist, then we have Andromeda's Edge, which was I just want to pull the seeds here. This was the number 7 seed from the sci-fi bracket.
Man. Upsets.
Wow.
Versus Mare Nostrum Empire is also the 7 seed.
Oh, lucky
from
sevens.
the fantasy.
I tell you.
All right. I feel like by default, I'm going towards Andromeda's Edge, having played it like a whole bunch of times, and all the arguments you guys made, even when I voted against it repeatedly, 100% agree with. This is a fantastic game. It's such an interesting system, and it's part of it is it benefits from being refined. the way it has been refined from
Mhm.
Dwellings of Elder Vale, and with more thought and intentionality around the theming. And maybe that system just works better in a sci-fi setting because then you can have that broader scope that you're expanding into. But yeah, I love Andromeda's Edge.
What do you say, Jeff?
I'm sure that was a treat for the listeners.
That was the part of our ASMR
Yeah.
broadcasting.
Yeah, I mean, the traditionalist in me says Mary Nostrum should definitely be the winner of this, but my gameplay experiences with Andromeda's Edge, even though it's not necessarily a traditional Civ builder, other than you're expanding your territory and gaining new technologies and building a Oh yeah. Andromeda's Edge. I guess I'm going to stick with the horse I rode. But boy, this was a tight one.
Pushed it right in there. Got to keep going.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go Mary Nostrum Empires. Just to note that it is by far a greater Civ game than it gets credit for, and I think people should take a look at it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, this conversation makes me want to go play it.
Yeah.
I don't own a copy of all these games. I own a lot of these. This is one I don't have, but I definitely want to track it down.
It was
And
based
one-
on an older game as well,
Yeah,
minus the Empires.
And the shout out I want to give to that game too is if I'm remembering everything correctly, it has a sort of a forced trading system.
Yes.
Like you are going to be trading with somebody whether
Yes.
you want to or not.
Mm.
And I love that because in so many games with trading, you can run up against the barrier where people are like, no, I don't want to trade. No, I don't want to do that. I don't, and
Yeah.
all the way down to Catan. I don't want to trade my wood
Yes.
for your sheep, right? And it reminds me, I'd be curious to talk to the designer. It reminds me a lot of Martin Wallace's Struggle of Empires with the Forced Alliance system, where in that game you are bidding who you're going to be allied with for the coming round. And so one of the great things you can do is you can make your enemy your friend. Even if they don't want to be your friend, you might have the ability to make your enemy your ally, which gives you crucial time. So those kinds of parts of the systems are things that I really appreciate. And I'm trying to I wonder who came up with that forced system first, whether it was the designer of Mare Nostrum or Martin Wallace with Struggle of Empires. Interesting question.
Yeah, that is interesting. That's a cool idea. All right. So we have one more matchup. It is from the left side of the bracket, which was our historical and micro civ categories, against the right side of the bracket, which is sci-fi versus fantasy. Clash of Cultures versus Andromeda's Edge. Let me pull up our matchup note here.
It's the matchup.
The matchup, the last one.
The final matchup.
Yes. So I
thought it was going to be TI4. I really did.
I did too. I was surprised you guys did that. But yeah, so we got Clash of Cultures, which we kind of labeled as the ultimate, traditional civilization themed and mechanical game, versus Andromeda's Edge, which is doing a lot of interesting, creative, new things within the space from a sci-fi perspective. What do you guys think?
It's hard.
Big sigh.
Big sigh. I mean, both of these deserve credit because you are coming out with a particular civilization, race, culture. You do have special abilities, powers, uniqueness that comes into play. Development is essential. Tech tracks are essential in both of these. Both of these do have direct interactions and battling throughout, so none of these are a solitaire kind of situation. Andromeda's Edge, I will say one thing we haven't mentioned, which I think is an interesting thing. I think Jeff, you might have started to hit on it a little bit. A little bit like Small World, Andromeda's Edge the game is all about that edge of I guess the galaxy there, and how the civilizations are growing out into the unknown edge. And there's aliens out there that are not known aliens to us. So these invaders are not really invaders. They live in that particular space, and as we're crossing into their space, they're pushing back on us. And I think that neutral civilization that's in play that typically is aggressive and negative. In some cases, there's one or two that actually benefit to you in trade and such. I think is also another interesting element to have a neutral civilization that interacts with the other civilizations in play. Um, Clash of Cultures certainly is the more robust kind of experience with all of the different figures on the map, all of the different powers and cards and special abilities and tracks that come into play and technologies. Drama's Edge is a lot more streamlined. It's a newer game. Clash of Cultures, the Monumental Edition, is obviously well refined. I don't know if I want to pick first. I don't want to pick first there.
Of course. Yeah, it's hard to pick first.
I think I know where we're going here, so I'm going.
We all know where you're going.
I think I'm going to go to Drama's Edge here because I think I know where Geof is going, and I want to give Anthony one of those days where he's got to make a decision.
I got to make the choice. Okay,
Geof, do we know where you're going, Geof?
Yeah, maybe not by as much as you would think.
Okay.
But yeah, Clash Cultures for sure for me. And that I think that it's interesting the way you talked about how the aliens function is kind of to a lesser degree the way I think the barbarians function
Sure.
in Clash Cultures, right? And
Mhm.
I love being able to place barbarians in really awkward positions for my opponents if I'm close enough to do that. I think that's really cool. They are there basically as a punching bag in the same way that the ancients are in Eclipse, in the same way that the old ones are in Small World or whatever they're called. The original sort of race that's already in decline when you start.
Yeah.
They're there as kind of a nice little way for you to gain some victories and fulfill some card objectives in Clash Cultures and whatnot. But to me, Clash of Cultures just tells a more sweeping story, a broader story. Andromeda's Edge, by its own very nature of being more streamlined and refined, even though it's not a short game, it's shorter than Clash Cultures. And I think that Clash of Cultures, just when you look at the totality of all of the things that it's trying to represent, I think it's trying to represent more than Andromeda's Edge is. And I can't tell you 100% that I'm right, but that's kind of the feeling that I have in my recollections of playing it. So I'm going to go with Clash Cultures.
Yeah, I mean, so these are both fantastic games. I have both of them. They're very close to each other on the shelf, actually. And here's the thing that like kind of skews me one way versus another, and it's not even that like I like one more than the other. I think honestly, if I had to rank these, it'd be almost like they're both up there for me. Like it's not like, oh, I like this one more, and so therefore it's hard to choose because of this. Like, no, I love both of these games. But from my side, like when I think of Civ games, part of it for me is all those components that go into it, like the building, the interactions with neighbors, the elements that feel like you're running a civilization, like the decisions you get to make that influence the way that it develops. But on the other side, the other thing that makes me feel like a Civ game is when I was 10 years old, sitting at my family computer playing Civ 2 for like 9 hours until my mom's like, go to bed. Right. And so for me, all of these kind of give me that feel, but it's the historical Civ games where I get to run through these different types of civilizations from throughout history, which I love reading about and I love playing through, and having a board game that like just so perfectly represents that on the table. And there's so many other games on this list that try to do that and don't quite get it, that I want to like more than I do. And there's some of these I like a lot, and they do a lot of the things I really like. Like Through the Ages is amazing. Nations, I know it's not for you, Geof, but I like it a lot because of the way you build up the tableau. Imperium, the great little puzzler with like working through those different civilizations. Clash of Cultures feels the most like those 9-hour sessions at the family computer, playing Civ 2 back in the day. So for me, as much as I love Andromeda's Edge, as much as I'd love for a non-traditional Civ game to win this, for it to be a sci-fi game, I have to go with Clash of Cultures myself.
All right. So my favorite game has emerged triumphant. Now, here's an interesting question, Anthony. I'm going to throw this out to you. If TI4 had made it to the final with Clash of Cultures, would your childhood memories of Civilization games have pulled at you strongly enough to make you come to the same conclusion, or would you have picked TI4? I'm just curious.
Oh, that's a good question. I hadn't thought about that. I think I might have skewed TI4. It really does. And like, it's one of those games that I feel like I get something a little bit more out of it or different out of it than, I mean, that's all games. That's all art, right? We get out we all get something different from everything that we interact with. But TI4, it just really feels like a Civ game in space to me. Like it has all those pieces that made me feel nostalgic like this does, but it's just like, but with these other races that are made up and out in space, and it's great. And we're all fighting over this planet that used to have this civilization on it, but they're gone. But now you're trying to harvest their technology and score points from it. It's so much fun. That would have been really, really close, though. I might have hemmed and hawed for a little longer to try to figure that one out.
Excellent. Well, thanks for. I was curious. I was really curious because I was really torn on that pick. But
right.
Yeah, because I could have seen it going either way. But yeah, all right, cool. Well, that was a lot of fun, guys. I really appreciate you inviting me on. I know it went longer than probably you were planning, mostly because I talked too much, but I really do appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk with you and spend some time talking about all these cool Civilization games. And, I got to say that you expanded my idea of Civ games with games like Wolves and March of the Ants, things that I hadn't really thought of. So I definitely appreciate that. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it was great having you on. And part of the reason, we thought it would be so great to have you is that we had such a great conversation last year talking about Civ games. And we really wanted to dive deeper into the games. Like last week, we kind of, we're going through these relatively quickly. It's like, no, we want to dive a little deeper. We want to talk about what makes them unique and good and interesting. I think it was awesome to have you here for that. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Geof, for coming, and thank you all for joining us this week. Hopefully this is an enlightening conversation about Civilization just as a theme and all the different ways that tabletop gaming does put into play. So whatever genre you might be into, I guarantee you there's a Civilization game out there for you. The complexity, the genre, the dynamic nature to it, the solo nature to it. There's a lot of fun stuff out there, so be sure to get out there and start playing some games. Until next time, this is Chris.
This is Anthony.
And I'm Geof.
And we'll save you all a seat at the table. Take care, everyone.
Hey there, Hugh from Moderation here. If you like today's show, then why not have a listen to Why We Roll, the dedicated TTRPG design podcast. It's hosted by Wythe and Chris, two professional TTRPG designers, and it's all about talking to the people that make our favourite games in the tabletop world and understanding what goes into that decision-making process, how you build something that's not just fun to play, but fun to experience. And we're not talking about how we roll, but learning why exactly we make those decisions. Check it out on our website at podderation.com.